Okay, thank you all for coming to the Gentile Lecture Series for the 2014-2015 academic years. A little history on the Gentile Lecture Series. Some of us who have been here for many years have worked for a long time with Jim Gentile, who was the Dean of the Natural and Applied Sciences for many years. And one of the pieces of hallmarks of Jim's tenure was that he encouraged all of us to think beyond our disciplinary silos and to think of ways that our science and our activities could focus on what's the problem we need to solve and what do we need to know to do that, as opposed to what can I do with the physics I know, in my case. And so to think across the boundaries and look for the places in the gray areas where we can actually solve some interesting problems. And in 2005, Jim moved to a different career, a different stage in his career, and left Hope College, and we didn't want to lose that that excitement and that desire to continue to stay exploring the different boundaries, exploring the interdisciplinary sciences, and asking interesting questions outside of our disciplines. So we created the Gentile Lecture Series to remind us of some of the great things that Jim had done along the way, and to also keep challenging us to think that different way, that interdisciplinary way. So for the last almost 10 years, we have been bringing in a distinguished speaker every year to help us think of new and interdisciplinary ways to think of new questions and problems and challenges out there. And we get to spend a day and a half with these wonderful individuals learning about what they do and getting their input on what we do. So at this point, we get to introduce this year's Gentile lecturer, and I'm going to let Evelyn Ritter, one of our Hope Engineering students, tell you about our guest.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evelyn Ritter, and I have the honor today of introducing Dr. Cherry Murray. Last night, I had the opportunity to learn about her life in the fast lane in physics research and leadership. She graduated from MIT with a PhD and moved on to research at Bell Labs. She's a celebrated experimentalist in light scattering and surface physics. She moved into leadership there and finished her time there as Senior Vice President for Physical Sciences and Wireless Research. Next, she headed to Livermore National Labs as the Principal Associate Director. During her time there, she was announced as the President of the American Physical Society in 2009. She then moved on to being the Harvard Dean of the new Engineering and Applied Sciences School. Last night, she mentioned how one of her most proud accomplishments there was her popular general education science courses. Last year, she won the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. That's just one of the many awards she won, but if I had to list them all, we'd be here all day. She is now serving on the U.S. Secretary of Energy Advisory Board. And today she's going to tell us about an important topic to our future, energy and the electricity grid. Please help me welcome Dr. Cherry Murray.
You cannot get close to me. You can't get the two microphones close together. Okay, well, that got your attention. Excellent, okay. So can you see the screen, those of you in the back? Can you hear me, those of you in the back? Great. Without screeching? Take it out of my pocket, okay. I will hold it. Maybe I should use the other mic. Can you hear me now? Great. Excellent. So I was feeling just a little bit unprepared on the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board when I heard a talk about what was going on with the electricity grid, because I knew it was incredibly important, and I had no idea what was going on. So I decided to do a bit of homework and research, and this talk today is a result of my research. So I was incredibly impressed at what has been going on over the last 10 years, if not 5 years, in the U.S. electricity grid. So I'll tell you a little bit about this. It's a little less technology and a little more science policy, which I'm very interested in. But it's important, and it's important for you, and it's important for all of us. So the outline of the talk is I'm going to give you quite a bit of background on our energy system. What is electricity? Where does it come from? A bit on the grid history, which I find very entertaining. Some grid basics, and this is truly interdisciplinary because you can't understand it without understanding markets and economics and how things are put together. And it's very complicated. And then tell you a bit about what's happening with the modernization of the grid, which is, in my view, quite amazing. So we spend about 8% of our gross domestic product on energy. It's been about 8% for a very long time. It's about $1 trillion. It is the life stay of our economy. It is very important. It is also an issue with sustainability of our planet, as we're going to 9 or 10 billion people on Earth who would like to have the standard of living that we do in the developed world. So this is becoming more and more important. And this is how we spend money on energy and energy consumption by the sectors: industry, transportation, residential, and commercial. And you can see that we've had somewhat of a stall in manufacturing, which is being resurrected as we speak. So we're going to actually go up in energy usage. Of course, over that time, the population of the U.S. has increased. The energy efficiency has actually also increased. One of the things about the energy sector, which is very, very different from most technology sector, is it's about 50 years between new developments in technology and new sources of energy. And so you can see that we're still using just about as much wood as we were in 1875, which I find mind-boggling for energy. And the green curve is nuclear. That started very late. But it takes a very, very long time because there's incredible infrastructure and a lot of capitalization that goes on in the energy sector. So how can it be accelerated? How can this be accelerated just like in the, let's just say, electronics? It's a very good question. And this is our energy usage. As I said last night, for those of you who were in my talk, I'm very visually oriented, so I have a lot of graphs and charts, and I will go through them rather quickly. This is not really to give you eye chart, but just to give you an impression of how complicated this problem is. You can see that oil and gas are a large part. We are about 100 quads, where a quad is a quadrillion BTU, or 10 to the 18 joules, a lot of energy. Oil and gas and natural gas and coal make up more than 3/4 of our energy, and this is important for our planet. There's the concept of energy return on investment. So if you have to put more energy into the power plant than you get out of it, this is a bad business proposition. So you actually have to get about 7 times more energy out than you put in. For coal and for nuclear, it turns out that number is about 50. So you get a huge amount of energy out for the amount of energy you put in. For oil and gas, it's about 30. For renewables, it's about 4. So we are not there yet for renewables. We have to put more energy into making a renewable power plant and operating it and shutting it down than we're actually capable of. It's not under 1, but it's under 7, where 7 is the magic number. So there's a lot of technology development that can happen in the renewable space, but we are going to be using the fossil fuels for a very long time. It is the fuel of our economy, so doing it cleaner would be a very good idea. So this is a very busy chart, and it's from Lawrence Livermore Lab, who do this for a living. So they take all of the energy inputs here. I don't know if you can read these, but this is solar, nuclear, wind here, hydro, geothermal. And you can see how small these lines are. These lines are proportional to the amount of energy that we are using. This is natural gas, this is coal, this is biomass, and this is petroleum. And where they go, electricity, we're talking about the electricity grid. Electricity here is made up mostly of coal, natural gas, some nuclear, quite a bit of nuclear, and a tiny, tiny bit of renewables. And then the rest of it goes to these sectors: residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation. And they, of course, use energy too. One of the things that struck me in looking at this chart and the data that might be striking you is this thing that's called rejected energy, otherwise known as waste. So we lose a tremendous amount of energy, particularly in the electricity sector and transportation. So if we can do something about efficiency or reuse, like, for example, heating the streets of Hope or Holland with waste heat from the power plant, then that's better. So there's a lot one can do in that regime. But the electrical grid, short history, a very similar history, but slightly more focused on government intervention in Europe. So at about the same time that there was a electricity grid program in Britain, Thomas Edison invented, well, he did not invent the light bulb, but he found a filament in the light bulb that actually worked, and created a industry around incandescent lighting. And he wanted to sell his light bulbs, and therefore wanted to replace all of the gas lamps in towns around with incandescent light bulbs. And he had the first demonstration of an electric power plant. He had to generate the dynamos, the power plant. It was direct current, and he lit up 190 some light bulbs and showed over about a mile radius, and showed that this would be doable, thus electrifying a city. And that was in New York, Manhattan. In 1886, George Westinghouse argued that you needed alternating current, and you could actually send electricity over long lines that way, because you needed to do it at high voltage. So for the same amount of power at high voltage, you use less current, and because the resistance is about the same, for those of you who are electrical engineers or physicists. And so going to super high voltage is incredibly important to go long distances. And there was a big war fought over should it be a DC or AC grid. And to make a long story short, AC won. So we have alternating current in our houses now, and alternating current over transmission lines. You will note these names, Edison and Westinghouse. Edison's company eventually became General Electric. It was General Electric, Edison company, and is now the largest, one of the largest conglomerates. And Westinghouse is a very well-known name too. But what was different in the US than in Europe was all of this was funded by venture capital. So J.P. Morgan and Vanderbilt funded the power plants. So it started out as a market-driven, I can make money on this, people putting power plants, building power plants as a company to make money, to then sell it to municipalities. And in the 1920s, there was a tremendous amount of different types of power stations going, financed by Wall Street. In 1934, the government, US government, got because they realized they need a little bit of regulation here. And the Public Utility Holding Company designated electric utilities as public goods, meaning that very much like water, the public was deserving of being given electricity, and various companies could not hog the business. Then there was 60 years of being regulated. Public utilities were built once they were called public and owned by municipalities. And also there were regulated industrial-owned companies that were regulated in the markets. But then, in 1968, there was a horrendous, 1965 was a horrendous New York City blackout. And in 1968, the utilities got together to create the National Electric Reliability Council because they realized they needed to band together to get more reliability, because otherwise the government would be after them, which it was. 1977 is the first time the US actually created a Department of Energy. And in that, which was very late in my mind, considering how important energy is. But what happened with the Energy Policy Act is they basically said you cannot any longer be vertically integrated, so the same company can't own the power plant, the transmission lines, and the distribution. They all have to be disaggregated. And people, since electricity by that time was incredibly important for health and safety of the populace, any company would be able to use the transmission lines of any other company. We are going through this argument with the internet right now, the free internet argument. Well, this was the argument with the transmission system. And there are various, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission regulates the transmission of electricity and other energy sources across state lines. Otherwise, states do the regulation. So this is very complicated because we have 50 states. So the federal regulators regulate only if you transfer energy between, say, Massachusetts and Rhode Island, but not within the state of Massachusetts. So there are a number of orders that happened that were independent system operators and what are called regional transmission organizations were allowed to voluntarily form. This was across states. Since the federal government regulates across state things, they are federal entities. And the Energy Policy Act actually provided incentives for alternate energy production, but reliability standards from this National Electric Reliability Council, which actually came before the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, but they then were put underneath the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. So are you confused now? So our electric grid right now is 19th century architecture. There's the network architecture of the transmission. There's, first of all, a bunch of power plants. So the very big power plants are connected to very long transmission lines. Extra high voltage. This has got a network architecture, so you can send power a number of different ways from one point A to point B, almost like the internet. Then it gets all of these little circles here are transformers. It's transformed down to lower voltage, still AC, and goes to the distribution grid. And the distribution grid is a radial network. So it's only one way can it get from, say, this substation to your house. This is why your electricity goes out. And there are some small city power plants. There are some minor renewable plants, all connected onto this. And what is happening? Oh, first off, I have to say, there are three major, what are called interconnection regions. So this shows you the transmission grid. There are three big ones. The Eastern Interconnection, which includes part of Canada, the Western Interconnection, and Texas. How that happened, you can imagine. Politics. Alaska is not connected, nor is Hawaii. And Hawaii has one grid per island and no connections between the islands. And so that is the power that is carried by all of these. Quebec interconnection actually operates in this. So each of these interconnections have the 60 hertz AC voltage in sync, in phase, over the entire region. And the connections between these regions are all DC, which is quite amazing. It's also high voltage DC, because now we know how to do that with this setup. So the reason
Use the microphone, please.
Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see. I can hear quite the difference. So what I forgot to say in the battle between AC and DC voltage, so alternating current and direct current, is because of Nikola Tesla and a number of other inventors, solenoids and transformers were invented, which can easily, just by wrapping wire, you can change voltages very quickly. It's harder to do DC-DC voltage interconversion, and now we can do it, of course. But back then, AC voltage shifting was very easy. So that's what we built out, because that was the technology that worked really quickly. So this is the regional transmission organizations. These people, you'll note, they don't cover all states. And the Texas one doesn't cover all of Texas either. It's only 3/4 of Texas. This independent, two of them are actually Canadian. And these are all under the regulation of the national, which is actually international, Electric Regulatory Commission, and they handle the markets for electricity. So on the transmission network, they run auctions for how to buy electricity between point A and point B. So these are wholesale markets, and each one of these runs a market. In the places that are not covered by non-regional operators, the states run the market, so the public utility commissions do. So you can see this is moderately complicated. Here are the reliability and balancing authorities. So there are almost 200 operators who are balancing authorities, and their job is to keep the network balanced. There's really very little storage on the network, so energy source and demand have to be met. This is why we have a lot of waste. And also the power companies have to be able to generate peak demand, so they have to have more power than people usually use. And those are the regulators that are not completely consistent with the markets, but almost. So what is happening today, and has been helped along considerably by the Department of Energy, is an incredible transformation, the first in 100 years. So we have this complex, technical, world's largest machine that kind of works at the moment, but needs to become way more efficient, and it needs to integrate renewables on it. And it is turning from mainframes and dumb terminals, so this 19th century architecture, to cloud storage and the internet. So we will have distributed sources of energy, such as photovoltaics on your house, and you will be able to sell that energy back in a retail market into the power grid. And it will be regulated with a lot of computers, and this is part of the transformation. A lot of new electronics that can measure very accurately whether the voltage is in sync and whether the load is getting too high in wires, and automatically shift and be considerably more reliable. So in the middle of this is a shale gas revolution, so I'll tell you a little bit about that, because that is actually quite profound, and I hear that Holland is getting a shale gas, natural gas power plant, municipal power plant. There's, of course, carbon emissions that we have to worry about. So we need to have more renewables. And renewables have this problem that photovoltaics only work when the sun shines, and wind only works when the wind blows. And the wind doesn't blow everywhere, and it doesn't blow in the regions that we need the energy. So you have to, it would be great if we have better energy storage that's not too expensive. Ubiquitous real-time sensors are coming, and I'll show you some of that. Then there are the microgrids. So your city or your college, in fact, University of San Diego, University of California, San Diego, has its own microgrid, which is very cool. Not only it has 20% renewables in it, but they have their own power station, and they sell to California Edison. Demand response in these wholesale markets is if you can agree, and there are companies, particularly in Texas, who agree. You tell them they can turn your thermostat down if the demand response gets too high, if the demand gets too high, and you get a lower bill because of that. And that is happening. There are also auctions of what are called negawatts, in other words, efficiency, so negative energy. So the auctions on a wholesale are between one utility and one distribution network. And you can actually purchase negative energy on this network in the markets. But there's got to be retail markets too. And what would work extremely well to get rid of all that petroleum in our transportation sector is to have electric cars. And electric cars are not going to work well unless you have considerably better electric grid. And the electric grid is, if it's powered by coal, then you're negating the whole point. If it's powered by nuclear and renewables and natural gas, you would actually save carbon emissions by going to an electric fleet. And all of the batteries in the cars could be electric storage. And so you would be doing storage for the network. But this actually has to be managed. And as I said, with all of the operators, over 3,000 utilities and distribution and transmission operators and power plants, and all of the municipalities that are in this, this is a very complex problem. So what is happening is that municipalities and states, like the state of Texas and the state of California, are just taking it upon themselves to revamp their grid on their own. It does not require an act of Congress, and it is actually working remarkably well. Yes, I forgot to say, the Internet of Things, so connecting everything to the Internet is only going to, all of these things also need to be powered, is only going to use more energy, so you need to keep that in mind as well. So the Department of Energy Office of Electricity and Energy Reliability has started a number of workshops for all of the stakeholders in this. And here's one, for example. And this is a list of stakeholders, so this is non-trivial, including consumers. So obviously utilities, and there are different types of utilities, third-party providers, regulators, authorities, all the way down to federal, regional, state, policymakers, all the way down to municipal vendors who are selling equipment into this, industry associations, R&D funders, such as the Department of Energy, the national labs, academia, and consumer advocates. And what this is being is not just a new technical solution to our energy grid, but all of the above. Yes, new technologies are very important. The grid is quite old. The transmission lines are quite old. And creating something that is one way to dumb terminals into an internet-like entity requires a lot of new devices, and so power electronics is becoming more and more exciting. But there are new business models, new regulatory models, new responsibilities. Consumers are now going to be able to sell back to the grid, so you actually have to understand what's going on and what you want to do and make choices. And you can do this in your own house. And there will be new providers of power and grid services, just like on the internet. And so in just asking some of these stakeholders what's the most important things they think of, number 4 here, distributed energy resource management. And cost-effective energy storage. So for those of you who are engineers or physicists or chemists who are interested in creating technologies, this is very big. The other thing is this just says, here's what the grid of 2030 needs to look at. There'll be dynamic power flow, there'll be microgrids, it will be autonomous, self-healing. Cybersecurity is extremely important. And of course, connected internationally. But let me tell you just a little bit about the shale gas revolution. So I was also unaware of this. You must have heard of fracking by now. But what has happened, if you look, there are two major things happening in the energy system. One of them is we are actually shutting off coal plants and putting in natural gas plants. This is actually good for the planet because about a factor of 2 less carbon dioxide goes up in the air from the same amount of energy. And we're starting to see considerable renewables in the grid. And this is a projection by the Department of Energy of what we are going to be using in the future. Natural gas has gone up by a factor of 2. Renewables, maybe 50%. Nuclear is staying about the same, and coal has gone down as a percentage. And since coal is definitely dirtier in terms of air pollution and dirtier in terms of carbon dioxide emissions into the air, that is a good thing. But note that it's not going away. And so what is happening in gas is this either tight sand gas or gas-rich shale is being mined. There are a number of sources of natural gas. We are pretty much out of the conventional associated gas, but being able to drill down very deep and then sideways and then do fracking causes an enormous, we do not have a limit in the amount of gas that we have in the US. This has helped in petroleum prices going down, and the US is now beginning to export natural gas instead of importing. So this is a big deal. If you look at the number of power plants that have been put in over the last 2 years, they're mostly natural gas, no coal. And this is just market forces. This is not the federal government saying anything. The age of the power plants are also extremely old. If you look at the nuclear plants and coal plants. And so the younger ones are all natural gas, and we don't have very much hydro anymore. Hydro being big dams, basically. Renewables are going up, as you can see, but not very fast because it's hard to integrate them in the grid without good storage. And one of the things that is most happening, and this is a market-driven thing, is a retail market. So you, as a customer, will actually have a deal whereby you sell to the grid if you put photovoltaic on your house, for example. So here's what's happening within the Department of Energy. Because of stimulus funding, $9.5 billion was put into the grid modernization. And that has caused a number of grid demonstration projects. It was co-funded industry in the Department of Energy. And you can see that a gazillion things are happening. And this, I think, is pretty amazing. So in 1999, someone whose name I forget, at Virginia Tech, so 1999, someone at Virginia Tech invented something called the synchrophaser, which measures at high voltage the voltage, the decrease in voltage in the phase of your voltage line, and it uses a GPS grid clock. And these are the number of these synchrophasers that were in April 2007 and now 2012. So we have completely outfitted almost the whole grid with parts of a control network, which lets you see what's going on in real time. So I would ask, what's the problem with this picture? What happens if the GPS system goes down? Which I know DOD is very worried about, and because they're very reliant, the Department of Defense is very reliant on the GPS system. So states, there is a grid modernization index by the Gridwise Alliance, so there are a number of industry groups they're looking at. And the two states that really stand out, as I said, are California and Texas. So Texas has its own regulator. It is its own grid interconnection region, and it's doing some remarkable things. If you go look up what is happening on the grid in Texas, they have retail markets, they have wholesale markets, they have the microgrid arrays, they have a huge amount of wind power in western Texas being transported across to eastern Texas where they're consumers. And here's where Michigan is, not bad, and Massachusetts is there. This is Wyoming. So I just wanted to remind me, widely deployed smart metering, auctions, and retail and wholesale markets for electricity, and new infrastructure being put in some states. In Hawaii, the governor just announced that there will go to 70% renewables. And they are already, so I spent 2 weeks in Hawaii over the winter holidays, and I was on the island of Kauai, and as I said, all of the islands have their own separate networks. Kauai, 70% of the houses already have photovoltaic on them, and the utilities are basically telling people they cannot do smart metering anymore because they can't accommodate it on the grid. So the governor just said, you will accommodate it. So they have to do something, and they're being forced to, and it's local. Massachusetts just put, after 2 years of discussion with all of the players, my long list that I have in the state of Massachusetts, default service to rate-based pricing. So Europe has had rate-based pricing for about 20 years. That is to say, if you turn on the lights when there's a lot of demand, they charge you more for electricity. So that's going in Massachusetts. And this is what the projects are in Michigan. So you can go look this up on the smart grid. All of these companies are co-funding projects. So there are a few concerns in this picture, just like there are concerns on the internet. One of the biggest ones is there an electricity divide coming with this new grid architecture? There certainly is in Hawaii. So there are the people who quickly got and put photovoltaics on and now can sell to the grid, and it's regulated by the state Public Utilities Commission, that they sell at exactly the retail price that they buy from. So it's an incredibly good deal for them. And then there are the people who now want to get into it and they're told no. Is that fair? And it's it's actually quite an important ethical situation. There are privacy concerns. So do you actually want, if you install a smart grid like a Next meter in your home, it learns what you do when you come in, when you leave, and it will turn your power down for you, or worse than that, Google, or, because Google bought them, or your utilities commission or your distribution network will turn your power down, or a third party who is buying out these meters and have a software that will lower your electric bill. But do you actually want all of those people to know when you're in your house and when you're out of your house? That's an issue. And of course, there's cybersecurity, which is an issue anyway. And the distributed grid is going to be better if parts of the grid can actually cut themselves off from the rest of the grid automatically, which is part of the architecture. Then there's coordination between the wholesale and retail markets. Who is looking out for the distribution company? This is what the companies are saying. Because if they have to sell back to the consumer, they have the infrastructure. They need to actually make some money. They don't need to make a huge amount of money, but they can't lose money. So they need to be paid effectively. And who's looking out for the consumer in all of this? This is very close to the same question that you all may have about you want to use an app on your iPhone and it says, may I use your location? Therefore, how many people now know what you're doing? Very similar lack of, say, anonymity. And then, this is a very different workforce than the grid has needed before. People who are going to be operating this grid are going to need to be highly cognizant in electrical engineering and computer science, and we don't have that kind of workforce. So that is also an incredible issue. And the future is actually quite bright. The reason I say that is there is an incredible push and a lot has happened, and it must happen and it will happen because there are market forces that are driving it. It is not top down, the government saying you have to do this, because that is a very long argument. But it's incredibly important that the government get all these stakeholder groups together and to work out these things and to demonstrate. And so you can go look up smart grid on the web, and you can see a lot of these projects are written up as the best practices. So that is my story about the transformation of the grid. I think it's actually pretty exciting, and I would welcome any questions. Yes.
We always hear about fracking, and I think relative to energy and needs, it's good, but the toxicologist always worries about the water table and what's happening in the fracking areas.
Right.
Can you comment what we know and don't know about the balance between risk and reward relative to fracking?
Yeah, so that is, of course, an incredibly good question. So there are actually two questions here. One of them is how, as I said, energy return on investment. So how much energy does it use to do fracking, or water for that matter, to do the fracking? And you have to take that into the picture. Instead of you drill a little hole and this oil comes up, which was the old petroleum oil well. You actually have to in a very safe and moderately high-tech way, drill down and then drill sideways, and then put just the right, mostly water, but the right surfactants and other unnamed entities, because it is proprietary, into the rock to get the gas to come out. So there are two questions. One of them is, can you do it safely, which is your question. And I believe the answer is yes. However, I served on the Presidential Oil Spill Commission right after the Deepwater Horizon blowout. And what interesting things that I learned about that is there's a different safety culture between the big companies like Exxon and I will call them the small mom and pop companies. And if Shell or Exxon is doing the fracking, they have very deep pockets and they will make absolutely certain that they're not damaging the water table. If smaller companies are doing it or regional companies, I would worry about it. So the Department of Energy has set up a voluntary website for the companies to tell the population, well, the world, exactly what chemicals they're using in their fracking fluids. And that's called Frac Focus. And that is being more and more populated because there's sentiment from the population that they want to know what's going on. So you need to have pushback from the consumer, but the big companies absolutely know they do not want to have a Deepwater Horizon. That's way more expensive than just doing it safely in the beginning. Yes?
One of your points early on was that you were going to continue to rely on fossil fuels to a large degree well into the future.
Right.
And another one of your simple concepts was the return on, energy return on the investment. But given that we already subsidize fossil fuels much more heavily than we do everything else, isn't that return on investment really just economic?
Yeah, not.
Economic function of the fact that we essentially externalize a lot of the real costs.
We do externalize a lot of the real costs. That's certainly true. There's also water externalities, and of course there's CO2 externalities, which are not, they're not part of the cost equation. Yeah, one hopes that any of the subsidies of fossil fuels are going to go away. Instead of having government subsidies, actually, some of this grid modernization project, you could say, is funded by a government subsidy because they took stimulus funds and said, we will co-fund with you, a power company, a project that shows that you can do something. And once you demonstrate it, then you have to pay for it. I don't consider that to be a subsidy. I consider that to be an incentive. So we need to have incentives for the right, government incentives for the right kind of energy sources and not continue to subsidize petroleum or coal. I completely agree.
Is the Department of Energy moving in that direction, or are they leaving that?
They're certainly making that argument, but they are not in charge of that. That is the Congress. So many of the regulators can do this by executive order, so the executive branch can do something, but they will be fought in the courts for the legislative branch, or Congress can, Congress is creating the subsidies, let me just put it that way. What is this?